This is the unboxing of the Alienware Alpha console. It's really a small desktop computer, like a micro PC, and the idea was for it to be a Steam console, although that hasn't really come to full fruition yet. It's still a possibility in the future. This is the base model with an i3 processor and 4 gigabytes of RAM and a 500 gigabyte hard drive. Later on in the video, of course, we're going to be upgrading those components. The first thing you see is instructions for how to use the on-screen keyboard with the included Microsoft 360 wireless controller. It's a lot easier to use a wired USB keyboard for the setup process, so we'll not worry too much about that. As you can see, everything comes very neatly packaged. First thing that we'll remove here is the included Xbox 360 wireless controller, which is nestled in there pretty tightly. It's quite nice that they have everything packed so securely so that nothing gets bumped about. So there's the controller. Of course, it comes with batteries. Over here is the wireless dongle. And over here, we've got our included HDMI cable. Most people have their own HDMI cables that they prefer to use, but this one is fine. Next we have part of the power supply assembly, a very large pack of silica gel, and the other part of the power supply. The power supply is pretty sizable, nearly as large as the console itself. As you can see, it's about the size of the 360 controller. And of course, we have the machine itself. It's really a beautiful design. Some people think it's ugly because it's, just kind of square and boxy, but personally I think that it's elegant in its simplicity. You can see our genuine Windows 8 sticker, our Intel Inside sticker, and as you can see, it's not a large machine. It's scarcely bigger than my hand. You can see all the connections on the back, of course, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those connections later on. One thing that I will mention is that don't get too excited about the two HDMI ports on the back. One of them is basically a throughput for your cable TV, just like the Xbox One. This is the point where we'll create a bootable backup for our Alienware Alpha. Now, you'll want to use a fresh flash drive for this part, meaning you don't want to use something with files already on it because it's going to be formatted and used solely for this purpose. Now, you want to make sure to get a flash drive that's the correct size. If you get one of those old 2 or 4 gigabyte flash drives, that's not going to work. It's going to be too small. So, other videos have suggested using an 8 gigabyte flash drive. I personally recommend getting a 16 gigabyte drive simply because we're a few weeks away from the Windows 10 launch. And so we'll probably need to create another bootable backup after Windows 10 comes out. So what you'll want to do is get your fresh flash drive out of the package. Make sure that there are no other flash drives connected to your PC. This would interfere with the process and it might get installed onto the wrong flash drive. Also, note the speed of your flash drive. If it's USB 3.0 compatible, you want to make sure to connect it to one of the rear USB ports. If it's only USB 2.0 like mine is, then you'll want to connect it to one of the front ports. But more importantly, if you have the USB 3.0, connect it to the back because it'll be that much faster. So, once you've installed that drive, we can just ignore all the pop-ups. You're going to want to go to your apps and go all the way over here to your Alienware apps and click on Alien Respawn. Click yes. Alien Respawn is the software that's going to allow you to create a bootable backup. If you've used your PC 2 or 3 times, it'll probably be in the system tray if you want to do it that way. So here you can see that it's a very simple layout. We're going to go straight right here to where it says bootable backup. And we're going to create a factory backup. Now this system that I have is a fresh installation, so a factory backup is going to suit us just fine. It's estimating 6.2 gigabytes for this backup. Ours is 14.9, which, like I said, gives us some room to grow later on. Just a warning that the drive will be formatted and completely erased. We'll click through that, and then this will take some time, especially if you're using a USB 2.0 drive like I am. As you can see, it took about 12 minutes, almost on the nose, to create our bootable backup. Once the process completes, this blue bar will pop up that says creation ended successfully. So we can click OK, exit out of Alien Respawn, and just because we want to be certain, we'll go here and look at our system recovery drive, and we see it's created all these directories and all of these other files. And as we can see, it is 6.2 gigabytes as predicted. So what we can do now is eject this drive. This is a process that we normally skip day to day, but it's important, since this is a bootable backup drive, to properly eject it so that we don't lose any of our data. So we can remove that drive, and then we're going to go ahead and power down the PC, because at this point we're ready to go ahead and replace the drives. Having created our bootable backup drive, we've now reached the point where we'll go ahead and simultaneously replace both the hard drive, and we're going to add some memory. So I've chosen the PNY CS 1111 solid state drive. This one's 240 gigabytes. It's a decent enough size to hold your OS and a few games and things like that. The price for 400, 500 gigabyte solid state drive goes up pretty quickly, so 240 though can be had for well under $100. This one in particular I caught on sale for about $80 at Best Buy. One thing that I want to point out though is that because this is such a small form factor, you want to make sure to get a 7mm drive. It's kind of hard to see right there, but this does specify that it is a 7mm drive. The other common sizes are 9 and 9.5 millimeters, which would be a little bit too big for this application. The Alienware Alpha comes pre-installed with 4 gigabytes of RAM in a single chip. I purchased this crucial memory stick. It's a 4 gigabyte DDR3L. The L stands for low voltage. This particular machine can handle either conventional notebook memory, which operates at 1.5 volts, or low voltage, which runs at 1.35 volts. Which isn't really that much low voltage compared to standard. It's only a 10% difference in voltage. But you can use either 1.35 volts or 1.5 volts as long as both memory sticks have the same voltage. This one in particular, like I said, matches the 1.35 volts of the pre-installed memory, so this should work out just fine and will double our total RAM to 8 gigabytes. You might notice that this particular stick says that it's compatible with Mac. That doesn't really mean anything. This is going to work just fine for us. It just happens to also be compatible with Macintosh computers, or Apple computers. So, when we go ahead and disassemble this, there are 4 Phillips screws in the corners adjacent to the rubber feet on the machine. So we're just going to go ahead and remove all 4 of these screws, and this will gain us access to the entire machine. Once you remove the screws, you just have to apply a little bit of force to remove the bottom of the machine. And once you do, it slides right out. You'll notice this component right here. This is actually a 5th USB port that's accessible from the bottom of the machine through a little trapdoor. So that's pretty cool. What we're interested in, though, is this portion right here. This is where the hard drive lives. You want to keep this screw separate from the rest because it is much smaller. Once you remove that single screw, we push upwards, and this releases the hard drive. You can see that it comes pre-equipped with a Seagate laptop thin 500 gigabyte hard drive, but this is a 5400 RPM standard magnetic hard drive, and we don't want that. So it's attached to the case with 4 small Phillips screws. So we'll go ahead and remove all 4 of them from the sides. Once you've removed the old hard drive, you can go ahead and install the new hard drive. You want, however, to be sure to orient the hard drive correctly in the case. In this case, with this particular PNY model, you want to make sure that the serial number and part number are facing down. This way, you'll notice that the connections on the hard drive, when we flip it upside down, are going to align with the connections on the motherboard here properly. So you want to make sure, once again, that all of the connections are aligned properly for your particular installation. So once you've seated the hard drive, the SSD, and the case, we're going to go ahead and reapply the same screws that we used before with the old hard drive. These will keep the SSD in place, but make sure not to tighten too much. We don't want to crack either the case holding the SSD or the SSD itself. Because the SSD has no moving parts, we don't need to tighten this too much because there's no vibration to worry about. Once you've screwed the SSD into the case, we can go ahead and line it back up the way it was before. Just like so. And then slide it back into place. There should be some slight pressure when you move it in, and that'll be the SSD connecting to the motherboard. You want to make sure to replace this small screw at the top right here. And just like that, we've replaced our old standard hard drive with a much faster SSD. Now that we've replaced the SSD, we can carefully turn the machine around, gently set it down, and then remove the top. This exposes the top of the motherboard. And you can see here, it's a very compact, very neat, very efficient design. And we have here the CPU component and the GPU component. We're interested in the CPU component because this is where the RAM slots are located. If we press these bars inward and lift up, this is going to remove the fan housing, and we can see here's the heatsink for the CPU, and we see here the first and second slots for the memory. It comes pre-installed with, I can't see, there's some off-brand of memory, and we're going to go ahead and install our 4GB chip. So that was a little trickier than I anticipated. The angle at which you insert the RAM chip is pretty steep. So once we've inserted that, then we can go ahead and press it down into its final position, and it'll snap right into place. So just like that, we've doubled our RAM. So we can go ahead and replace the CPU fan assembly, and we can go ahead and put the top of the case back on, carefully holding it from the bottom, rotate the machine back to where we were earlier with the hard drive, and then we're just going to replace the bottom of the case. It should snap back into place all the way around. You don't want to force it, because once we put the screws in, it should snap back into place where it's meant to. So at this point, we go ahead and replace our case screws, and we're done. After we've reassembled the machine and plugged our keyboard, mouse, HDMI, and power back in, we can go ahead and plug in the bootable backup from our USB flash drive. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and power the machine back on. As you can see, it's going to take us into a system recovery mode since there's no information on the SSD. But everything that we need is stored safely on our flash drive. Happily, we see the Alienware logo, which means that the backup drive is working. Alien Respawn, welcome. This will help you get your computer restored and running. So we're going to go ahead and click Next. It's going to attempt to repair the system first, which of course is going to fail because there is no system to repair. So we're going to click Next to start the recovery process, and we have this factory image on our USB drive, which we created not at 4:41 p.m., but not too long ago. So we're going to select that, click Next. At this point, when it says preparing your hard drive, it's formatting it for use. I'll take this moment to mention that whether it's the Alienware Alpha, a desktop or laptop that you've had for a few years, upgrading to a solid state drive is by far one of the most cost effective and noticeable and significant improvements you can make to a machine. Even 7200 RPM standard drives are very slow compared to SSDs, and you'll notice a huge difference in the boot up time and how quickly things load once you've upgraded to an SSD. So, like I said, even if it's a new build, the Alienware Alpha, or even if it's something that you've had for a couple of years, your old desktop or your old laptop, SSDs are inexpensive enough now that you can take any old system and breathe new life into it by upgrading the SSD. And usually, when you do a fresh install of Windows along with the SSD, that's going to freshen things up a bit as well. Your old install of Windows probably has a bunch of registry errors and things like that, which are going to slow down your system considerably. There we go. So it already restored the alien's respawn settings, and it's finalizing. This shouldn't take too long. And once it's finalized, we can expect a reboot. And excellent. So the recovery is complete. We're going to click restart down here. Now, this, of course, since it is a factory reboot, or a factory backup, we're going to have to go through the registration process all over again, where we select our time zone, enter our Microsoft account information, etc. So that's going to be just the same as it was before. So we're going to go ahead and go through this whole process that we've been through already. Accept everything. By the way, I strongly recommend when you get an Alienware to have a USB keyboard and mouse ready because it makes the whole process much faster rather than having to use the Xbox 360 controller, etc. So at this point, I have finally finished re-registering Windows and all that good stuff that you have to do whenever you restore a system. And so now we can finally go ahead and verify that our RAM upgrade took. So we're going to go ahead and open up File Explorer, right-click on this PC, and click on Properties. And right here it says Installed RAM, and we can see it says 8 gigabytes. So now we've gone ahead and doubled our RAM, and we can we can also go ahead and head back and check how much room our operating system has taken up. Not too bad. So right now, with our clean install, we've used 28.3 gigabytes and we have 187 gigabytes free. So we have quite a bit of free space, even after the OS, to install games and whatnot. Now, the Alienware Alpha, it's designed to be essentially a Steam console. That's why it has two modes when you boot up. It has console mode and desktop mode. Now, most people typically use it in desktop mode and use the Steam desktop app, although you can use the console mode and it does have some advantages. Now, with that being said, the Alienware Alpha isn't meant to be a performance machine. It's an entry-level machine. That's why it costs, anywhere from $400 to $500 on sale. I personally grabbed mine when it was $400 at Best Buy, and with the 10% off coupon, it actually came out to be about $360, which is a very good price for an entry-level gaming machine. So, like I said, don't expect this machine to play all the latest and greatest games at 4K resolution at 100 frames per second. It's not going to do that, nor do we expect it to. As an entry-level machine, it's going to play most games at a decent frame rate at 720p. So again, we don't want to put unrealistic expectations on this machine because it is entry-level. But on the other hand, it's going to do pretty well with most games you throw at it. So the last thing that I wanted to illustrate before we conclude is how much faster boot up is with an SSD. So we've gone ahead and installed our critical updates, so we shouldn't have any updates pending, so we should be able to just do a clean restart and see how quickly we go from... Actually, you know what, let's go ahead and shut it down completely and just do a cold boot. So at this point the machine has powered down completely. I'm going to go ahead and press the power button now. And let's see how long it takes to go ahead and get logged in. Yep, so there's our loading screen. We'll go ahead and put in our password. And we're in Windows. We're ready to roll. So as you can see, it's extremely fast compared to what we had with the standard hard drive. So that concludes our video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.